It was one of the biggest and most anticipated decisions of the Supreme Court term this year, Trump v. United States. It came out just a couple weeks ago here, and it says that the President of the United States, whoever that president is at a given time, generally will have certain types of immunity from criminal prosecution for acts that he did that were official acts while in office. So we're going to take a couple minutes and try to break this down because there's been a lot of hysteria and a lot of discussion over what this means. There's been a lot of fear that's been generated about what the current or future presidents could do in response to this. And I thought it was helpful maybe just to talk a little bit about this decision. And I want to encourage you, if you have an opinion or you want to have an opinion about this, go and read. There's over 100 pages of opinion and dissent on this. Go and read these opinions, the concurrences, the dissents, and try to grapple with these issues. Another faster way to do it, if you don't like reading quite that much, is listening to all of the oral arguments. The Supreme Court held long oral arguments on this. You can go and listen to that. Free Law Project posts it. SCOTUS blog will have links to the oral arguments, I believe, as well. Plenty of places you can go and access that and listen to it. This is a really interesting issue, and it's a very difficult issue. And anybody who thinks this isn't difficult, I kind of am suspicious of. The question before the Supreme Court was whether a president can be prosecuted criminally for things he did while in office. Now, you may have an immediate and knee-jerk reaction to that, but think about it this way. In the past, going all the way back to our founding, the Supreme Court has found at various times that presidents can't be sued civilly for what they did in office. Okay, so an employee of the federal government who sues the president and says, I lost my job because you made a budget cut or you ordered a change in this department and it caused me to lose my job, the employee can't bring a suit against the president civilly for that and say, I had a right to work here. He may be able to sue other departments, he may be able to sue other people, but we've just generally said, the Supreme Court has said, you can't sue the President of the United States for these things because we don't really want the President making decisions about where to move aircraft carriers in the Gulf. We don't want him stopping to say, boy, could I get sued for this? We don't want the President to not be able to be an energetic and vigorous leader because he's worried about his own finances. So this is a major decision the Supreme Court has made a number of times. There are various ways in which this is played out. It's also meant that you can't generally get discovery from a president while he's in office. So the Supreme Court has said you can't generally sue a guy and sue the president, use this as a pretext to get information from him that he might not otherwise want to disclose. We've also said that he has executive privilege that says when Congress asks for certain types of documents, there are times the president can withhold those because he says, I couldn't do my job effectively if I wasn't able to take notes because I was afraid that the opposition party would just get him through a subpoena from Congress. So over and over again, our courts, and the Supreme Court in particular, has had to work out what these immunities look like. But this is the first time that we've been called upon to have a discussion about whether a president can be prosecuted. And that's because this is, according to Chief Justice Roberts, the first time that a former president has actually been prosecuted after leaving office. So the question before the court is, does he get criminal immunity just like he gets civil immunity? And the court's answer was, sort of. Now, this has been reported various ways in the press, but the reality is what they said is he gets some sort of immunity, but it's not immunity for everything. And they basically broke it down into two kinds of actions a president takes. The court said when the president is taking an official action, they were fairly broad in what this means, but an official action, meaning if you can point to something in the Constitution that covers what he was doing, he can't be prosecuted for what he was doing within that action. So, for example, the President of the United States presumably can't be prosecuted for violating some sort of law for ordering a military action if it's within his scope as Commander-in-Chief. FDR couldn't have been prosecuted for where he sent a specific division in World War II. Harry Truman couldn't have been prosecuted criminally by the next president for deciding to drop the atomic bomb. As long as he's operating within the scope of constitutional authority, he can't be prosecuted. Now, there's been a lot of fear and a lot of concern. Well, does that mean the president could order the execution of his political opponents? And the answer, I think, pretty clearly there is no, because that's not within the scope of constitutional authority to send the American military against an American citizen. So that's what a lot of people have been arguing about. The second part is a lot harder, which is, can the president be prosecuted for unofficial activities? It's things that fall outside of the constitutional scope. For example, in this case, President Trump was indicted for, among other things, trying to persuade state officials to send fake electors to Washington, D.C., or to their states to send on fake votes to Washington, D.C. That's the allegation in the indictment. No matter what you think about the politics of it, that's what he was indicted for. The Supreme Court said that's a harder question, and they're not going to decide that today because that hasn't really been fleshed out in the lower courts. They've sent it back to the district court with instructions to say, you need to kind of work through what's actually in this indictment and do an analysis in the first instance of whether the actions that he's taken fall inside or outside of the constitutional scope of his power. This is going to leave open the question of whether President Trump's statements that he made at the rally on January 6th or other actions he took to try to persuade state officials, were those in or outside of a constitutional scope of duty? Some of them the court seemed to indicate probably were outside of the scope of duty and left it to the lower court to figure that out. I've seen a lot of just totally incorrect headlines, totally incorrect news stories. The Supreme Court has decided that the president's totally immune from criminal prosecution. It's not what they decided. Both sides took very extreme positions in this litigation. The government, on behalf of the current president and the attorney general, took a very broad scope on this and said that they believe that the president is basically never exempt from prosecution for what he does while he's in office. The concern with that position, and in an oral argument, this was really interesting to listen to, the concern a lot of the justices had is that means that every subsequent president can order their attorney general to prosecute the last guy. President Trump's attorney general could have investigated and prosecuted President Obama, saying, well, there was that whole, guns issue down on the border, or he didn't prosecute the laws as it went to immigrants fiercely enough, or someone could prosecute President Trump as they're trying to do on a number of issues that he did that allegedly violate federal law. And in this case, what President Trump is indicted for is a very broad statute that basically says it's illegal to assist or aid any sort of a delay of a government duty. And because he allegedly encouraged people to go into the Capitol on January 6th or to protest outside the Capitol, that delayed the counting of electoral votes. This is a very broad statute. And as you can see, every president will be able to go back through and pick through what the last president did and bring prosecutions. The Supreme Court said to do that would be to totally gut the executive branch. It would mean that the President of the United States would have to look at every action through the lens of, am I going to get prosecuted for this when I leave office? Presidents might be encouraged to do what we've always been concerned about, which is pardon themselves before they leave office to make sure that they're absolved of any responsibility. One of the interesting issues that arose in this litigation had to do with the impeachment clause. The impeachment clause says that the president, if he's impeached and removed by the Senate from office, that impeachment only affects his removal, that they can't do any other punishments. The Senate doesn't have any power to do anything other than to remove him from office and to bar him from office in the future. That's all they can do. But it doesn't stop, it says, him from being prosecuted by other means in the future. So this certainly seems to underlie, or I should say belie, President Trump's position, which his lawyers took, which was that he couldn't be prosecuted at all. The Supreme Court said that can't be right because here we have clear text in the Constitution that says he can be prosecuted through normal means. They try to argue that clause means that he can only be prosecuted if he's first impeached and removed from office. But that doesn't really seem to make a lot of sense. The Supreme Court explained in a number of pages why. So the current state of the law now is that the president does have some immunity. He has fairly broad immunity from criminal prosecution, but it has to be for an official act taken within his role as president of the United States. If it falls outside of that, prosecution is still possible. If all this seems strange, if you think, well, gosh, that's a scary thought that the president can do things and can escape criminal prosecution, keep in mind that our Constitution is built on the idea of checks and balances. It says that if the president is doing things that we think are wrong, then the Congress has power to impeach and remove him. The 25th Amendment provides provisions to temporarily remove him from office. And most importantly, you, dear viewer, you are the check and balance on the President of the United States because you get to vote. And every 4 years, we pick a president based on who we think is best able to discharge the duties of that office. This is an incredible responsibility. It's an awesome thing. And the Republican experiment, or the Democratic experiment, depending on how you want to think about it, in this country is still ongoing. We are trying to figure out if we as a people can sustain this as a system. We have to hold our leaders accountable and not depend on others to do it for us. I hope this helps, and as you have discussions in the comments, try to keep it civil and respect one another.